At the peak of his reign, Pablo Escobar was pulling in up to $60 million every single day. He built estates with private zoos and mounted the very planes he used for smuggling directly over his front gates. He weaponized his wealth to systematically compromise the Colombian state. Through a doctrine of plata o plomo, silver or lead, Escobar ensured that those who couldn't be bought were removed. By 1993, the man who once outspent the government was hiding in a dilapidated, unheated safe house in the remote mountains. When his young daughter fell dangerously ill, Escobar couldn't access a doctor, a heater, or even a blanket. He was forced to open his bags of cash and feed $2 million into a makeshift fire just to keep her warm. This is the core paradox of Escobar's wealth. He had more money than almost anyone on Earth, yet it reached a point where it was more useful as kindling than as currency. Despite his control over the underworld, Escobar was driven by a need for public legitimacy. In the early 1980s, he attempted to pivot from a shadow figure into a legitimate politician. Entering the political arena moved him from a world where he set the rules to one where he was subject to them. He was suddenly facing adversaries like journalists and reformers, people who traded in public records rather than bribes. When Senator Luis Carlos Galán publicly exposed Escobar's criminal history, the result was a swift and humiliating expulsion from Congress. This wasn't just a political setback, it was the first time the state's institutions had successfully pushed back. This exposure fueled the drive for extradition, the prospect of being sent to a U.S. prison, where his connections and bribes held no value. Escobar responded with a campaign of domestic terrorism. He moved from tactical assassinations to a total offensive against the state, targeting judges, police, and civilians in a desperate attempt to force the government to rescind its extradition laws. This reached a peak with the bombing of Avianca Flight 203. Over 100 innocent people died in midair, all to target a single politician who wasn't even on the flight. By stepping into the political light, Escobar traded his underworld immunity for public visibility, turning himself into a target the state could no longer ignore. The government responded by creating the Search Bloc, a specialized unit backed by American technology and intelligence with the singular mission of dismantling Escobar's network. After a brief surrender to a luxury prison of his own design, Escobar escaped in 1992. But this time he didn't return to power. Instead, he was transformed into a permanent fugitive, constantly on the run from the authorities. The cartel operated as a network. Escobar was the hub, requiring lawyers and money launderers to translate cash into power. A rival group began a campaign of attrition, systematically eliminating the people who managed his operations. This strategy destroyed the purchasing power of Escobar's billions. Accepting his money became a liability so high that his bribes were no longer worth the risk of certain death. He was forced to separate from his family and cycle through safe houses daily, moving through the jungle with a dwindling group of loyalists who were being picked off one by one. Escobar's wealth didn't disappear, it simply became useless. A billionaire has no power when there is no one left alive willing to take his cash. By December 1993, Escobar was a man without an army. Stripped of his leverage, his final exposure came from the one thing he refused to give up: his connection to his family. He stayed on a phone call with his son for several minutes, allowing the Search Bloc's technology to triangulate his radio signal and pinpoint his exact location in Medellin. The man who once controlled the flow of billions died alone, barefoot on a suburban rooftop, while trying to outrun a police unit he could no longer afford to bribe. While the drug trade continued under new leadership, Escobar's real legacy was a generation of Colombians who grew up amidst chronic violence and a deep, lasting distrust of the state's ability to protect them. In the end, Escobar's life demonstrated the ultimate limit of wealth. He died with more money than he could ever count, but with no place left to spend it. His mountain of billions had become little more than fuel for a fire.